Growing up in a quiet suburb just outside Boston, I learned early that being the oldest didn't always mean being seen. I was 8 when my brother Jake was born, and from that moment on, the spotlight shifted. Not slowly, not subtly. Like someone flicked off the light that had barely started to shine on me. And it never came back. My parents, Robert and Sarah, weren't cruel in the traditional sense. They didn't scream or hit, but their neglect was like wallpaper in our home. Always there, always wrapping itself around me, even when no one acknowledged it. Jake was the golden child, and I was just there. When I was in 6th grade, I spent 3 months building a detailed model of the solar system. I calculated orbital rotations and axis tilts, glued planets to metal rods, and painted each one with care. I won first prize at the science fair and even received a special commendation for mathematical precision. I rushed home that night, clutching my certificate like it was a golden ticket to finally being noticed, but my parents didn't come to the ceremony. Jake had t-ball practice, not a game, just practice, and that was apparently more important. My award sat on the fireplace mantel for a week, unopened before it was quietly moved to the basement. The living room wall, covered in Jake's participation ribbons, Little League, summer soccer, spelling bee, honorable mention. Mine, forgotten. I remember when I got straight A's for the first time in 8th grade. My mom said, "That's nice, but don't rub it in too much. Jake's trying hard in regular classes." She said it like my effort was somehow offensive, like my success was a threat to his comfort. At 16, Jake got a new car for his birthday to build his confidence. I got a part-time job to save for college and buy my own clothes. High school was more the same. When I graduated valedictorian, I stood on the stage, staring out at rows of empty folding chairs. My parents were in the stands but missed most of my speech because Jake was bored and started playing with his Game Boy. When I announced I'd been accepted into MIT on a partial scholarship, my mom's response was, "That's nice, honey, but did you hear Jake might make starting pitcher next season?" That was the moment I realized, no matter what I did, it would never be enough. I wasn't the son they celebrated. I was the test run, the trial and error child they practiced on before raising the one they really cared about. At 18, I packed my things for MIT and took the train alone. My parents dropped me off early because Jake had a summer league game. They didn't even help me unpack. I spent the next 4 years carving out a life on my own terms, one where I wasn't just Jake's brother. I found my footing in computer science, where equations didn't care who your parents favored, and for once I was evaluated by merit, not by birth order. I was still holding out hope, though. Hope that maybe one day they'd notice, that maybe all the years of being overlooked would amount to something, that if I became successful enough, good enough, valuable enough, they'd finally see me. But I was wrong, and I hadn't even met Amy yet, the woman who would make me feel truly seen for the first time in my life, only to shatter me more deeply than I ever imagined. After graduating from MIT with honors, I landed 5 job offers. I picked one at a mid-sized software firm back in Boston. Not because I missed home, but maybe, deep down, I still craved the kind of recognition I had never received. I thought if I worked close by, maybe my parents would finally be proud. They weren't. They were too busy helping Jake figure out which college major to switch to for the 3rd time. My mother once asked me, sincerely, if I still worked with computers, as if I wasn't leading an entire development team at 24, but all of that faded the day I met Amy. It was at a coffee shop near my office, small, cozy, always smelling like cinnamon and roasted espresso. She was the barista behind the counter, remembering everyone's name and favorite drink like it was magic. The first time she handed me my coffee, I noticed a sticky note on the cup. It read, "Smile more, I bet it looks great on you." I thought it was a mistake. It wasn't. She later confessed she'd been leaving little notes for weeks before I ever looked up from my laptop. I'd been too absorbed in code and deadlines to notice someone was trying to see me. Amy didn't just see me, she got me. On our first date, we sat for 6 hours talking about everything, our childhoods, fears, future plans. When I told her about my family, the years of being ignored, the constant comparison to Jake, she didn't try to fix it. She just said, "They're blind." They had gold in their hands and didn't know it. I remember going home that night with something I'd never had before, hope. Amy brought color to my grayscale world. We spent weekends exploring used bookstores and hiking through the White Mountains in New Hampshire. She loved old jazz and dark chocolate, and she could always find joy in the smallest things, like the way the sun hit the window in the mornings, or how our cat would flop over on his back for belly rubs. She made our condo in Cambridge feel like a real home, something I never knew growing up. Plants in every corner, art on the walls. She even painted a quote above our kitchen table, "Us against the world." After 14 months together, I proposed in the place where we met. Amy said yes with tears in her eyes, saying she'd been waiting for that moment since our second date. Our wedding was small, just a few friends and family. My family showed up late, sat in the back, and spent most of the reception talking about Jake's new job opportunity in California. My mom even interrupted Amy's father's toast to read a text from Jake about a second interview. I should have taken it as a red flag, but Amy just laughed it off, saying, "At least they're consistent." She always tried to see the good in people. Maybe that's what made her so easy to love and so easy to break. For 3 years, we built a quiet, content life. We bought a little condo with a balcony just big enough for her herb garden. We talked about starting a family. Amy supported me through promotions, through stress, through it all. And then Jake came back from California, back into my life, and eventually into hers. But back then, I had no idea how quickly that return would unravel everything I had built. I had no idea that the brother I was finally starting to trust again would become the reason I'd lose everything. Jake returned to Boston in late spring. He sent me an email out of the blue. It was long, almost poetic, filled with phrases like, "Life comes full circle and family is everything." He said California wasn't for him, that the startup world was toxic, and he missed his big brother. He wanted a fresh start, to reconnect, to right the wrongs of our past. Amy read the email over my shoulder. "Maybe he's finally grown up," she said. "People change." I wasn't convinced, but after a week of hesitating, I agreed to meet him for dinner. To my surprise, Jake seemed different, calmer, humbled even. He admitted to coasting through life on charm and our parents' approval. He said he envied my career, my relationship, and even my boring stability. We laughed about old memories, even the painful ones. It felt healing. I wanted to believe him. Maybe I needed to. A week later, I introduced him to Amy. They clicked instantly. Jake, ever the entertainer, charmed her with funny stories from California, failed Tinder dates, and exaggerated impressions of tech bros. Amy laughed more than I'd seen her laugh in weeks. It didn't bother me, at first. I was just relieved to see them get along. Jake became a regular fixture in our lives. He'd drop by for dinner once or twice a week, often unannounced. He brought wine, offered to help in the kitchen, shared music playlists with Amy. They had inside jokes, ones I wasn't part of. At first, I told myself it was harmless. My brother was lonely. My wife was kind. But then the little things started to pile up. I'd walk into the room, and their laughter would suddenly die. Amy's phone would flip face down when I sat next to her. She started putting on makeup on days Jake was coming over, even if we were just staying in. And Jake? He'd sometimes show up when I wasn't home yet, claiming Amy had invited him to hang out. Once I came home early and saw him sitting on the couch, my spot, legs propped up, drinking from my favorite mug, laughing with Amy about something on her phone. I stood in the doorway longer than I should have, wondering how something so simple could feel so wrong. When I mentioned it to Amy later, she waved it off. "You're being paranoid. He's your brother. Stop overthinking." So I did. I told myself I was imagining things. I tried to be the bigger man. Maybe I was just insecure. Maybe I needed to trust more. Then came the pregnancy announcement. We were having dinner, Jake included as usual. Amy set her fork down mid-bite and said, "I have some news." Her hands trembled as she pulled out a sonogram from her purse. "I'm pregnant." Time slowed. My mind raced with questions, but none of them made it past my lips. Jake didn't say anything at first. Then he smiled. Not a surprised, congratulatory smile. A knowing, smug kind of smile that turned my stomach inside out. He said nothing, but his eyes said everything. I remember gripping the edge of the table so hard my knuckles went white. Amy looked at me with tears in her eyes, saying, "This is a blessing, right?" I wanted it to be. God, I wanted to believe it. I convinced myself it was just stress making me suspicious, but deep down, something in me had already cracked. I didn't know it yet, but this wasn't the beginning of a new chapter. It was the beginning of my undoing. After the pregnancy announcement, our lives shifted in a way I couldn't quite name. The walls of our condo, once filled with comfort and laughter, now echoed with a strange, sharp silence. Amy seemed more radiant than ever, but there was something behind her eyes, something I couldn't place. Jake, meanwhile, became more involved than any uncle should be. He started referring to the baby as our little one. It was subtle, almost playful, but my chest tightened every time he said it. He rubbed Amy's belly without asking, showed up with prenatal vitamins, picked nursery paint swatches. When I mentioned a baby moon trip I'd been planning for just Amy and me, something quiet up in Vermont, he invited himself along. Amy didn't protest. She said, "It'll be fun to have Jake with us. He's family." And that word, family, started to feel like a choke chain. I tried to talk to Amy one night, tried to ask why Jake was constantly around. She sighed and told me I was being controlling. "He's your brother," she said. "He's finally trying to be part of your life. Why are you pushing him away?" Her words made me feel small, paranoid, ungrateful, but the truth was screaming inside me. The final blow came on a Tuesday night. Amy had fallen asleep early, curled up next to me. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. I don't know what made me reach for it. 6 years together, and I had never once invaded her privacy. I believed in trust. I built our marriage on it. But that night, something inside me shattered. The phone wasn't even locked, as if she didn't think she needed to hide anything anymore. Their messages were all there, hundreds of them. Flirty texts. "I miss you. Can't wait to feel you again." Photos, plans for hotel meetups, conversations about their baby. It had started just weeks after Jake returned to Boston. They'd been sleeping together behind my back for nearly 6 months. One thread hit me like a truck. Jake writing, "He's too busy with work. You need someone who really sees you." Amy responding, "He'll never leave if he thinks this is his baby. We'll tell him after the birth, when he's too attached." I sat there until dawn, frozen, my heart breaking in slow motion. When Amy woke up and saw me holding her phone, the color drained from her face. She didn't even deny it. Tears poured down her cheeks as she whispered, "I didn't mean for it to happen. It just did." She said Jake made her feel alive, that I'd become too distant, too focused on work, that I never really understood her. I didn't yell, I didn't cry, I just stood up and walked out. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't breathe in that house anymore. Later that morning, I called my parents. I needed them, for once, to be there for me, to tell me I wasn't crazy, that what happened was unforgivable, that I mattered. But instead, my mom said, "Jake made a mistake, but he's going to be a father now. You need to forgive him." "And my father?" He added, "Try to be the bigger person. Think of the baby. It's not the child's fault." My hands trembled as I ended the call. They chose him, again, just like they always had. That night, I checked into a hotel, and I called a divorce attorney. Divorce isn't just paperwork. It's grief. It's sitting in silence, staring at walls that once held love, now tainted with betrayal. It's the unraveling of the life you thought you were building, thread by painful thread. The morning after I left, I sat in my hotel room with Amy's messages still burned into my memory. I hadn't slept. I hadn't eaten. I was still in the same clothes from the night before, heart pounding with disbelief. I had always imagined betrayal might look like screaming, broken dishes, a dramatic confrontation. But mine was quiet. It was numbness. It was watching your entire world burn from behind a glass window. My lawyer, Elise, was calm and razor sharp. She'd seen cases like this before, affairs, lies, tangled family dynamics, but even she raised an eyebrow when I told her who the affair was with. "Your brother?" she asked, incredulous. I nodded. "And the baby?" "His," I said, my voice hoarse. The plan was to wait until after it was born. They thought I'd be too attached to leave. Her expression shifted from shock to steely resolve. "Then let's make sure they don't take anything else from you." Over the next few weeks, Amy alternated between begging me to forgive her and accusing me of abandoning our family. She said Jake was a mistake, that she missed me, that she was overwhelmed, that I was emotionally distant and too focused on my work. Classic gaslighting. Jake, on the other hand, tried to play the noble martyr. He emailed me. "We didn't plan this. It just happened. But now that a baby's involved, we need to talk like men." I forwarded it to my lawyer and blocked the address. But the worst part wasn't Amy or Jake. It was my parents. They treated the betrayal like a minor inconvenience. My mom kept repeating, "What's done is done. You need to move forward, not hold on to grudges." And my dad? He had the audacity to say, "Jake's stepping up. He's going to be a father now. Maybe this will make a man out of him." They never asked how I was doing, never came to see me, never said sorry, not once. In their eyes, Jake was still the golden son. Even impregnating his brother's wife wasn't enough to shake their blind loyalty. After 2 months of negotiations, the divorce finalized. Amy walked away with a modest settlement, thanks to Massachusetts law and Elise's brilliance, but I kept the condo and most of my assets. I felt both relieved and hollow, like I'd won a war but lost my soul in the process. I cut contact with everyone, blocked numbers, changed email, even asked building security to deny my family entry. I needed space. I needed to remember who I was before all of this. Some nights, I lay awake wondering if I could have done something differently. Maybe I missed something. Maybe I was too focused on work. Maybe I wasn't enough. But that voice, the one that had haunted me since childhood, started to fade. Because deep down, I knew the truth. I didn't cheat. I didn't lie. I didn't destroy a marriage or manipulate a family. They did. And now, for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to play the role of the forgiving son or the understanding brother. I was going to be free. I thought they'd finally leave me alone. After all, I had done what they asked. I walked away. I gave up the marriage. I left the family. I didn't make a scene or seek revenge. I simply disappeared. But apparently, disappearing wasn't enough. It started with a voicemail from my company's front desk. "Your mom's here. Says it's urgent." I nearly dropped my phone. Sarah, my mother, was sitting in the lobby of my office building, refusing to leave until she could speak to her poor son. Poor Jake, poor Amy, poor baby, not poor me, the one who lost everything. When I stepped into the lobby, she stood up with a practiced smile, holding a manila folder and a Tupperware of banana bread, like we were just catching up after church. She launched into a speech that was clearly rehearsed. "Jake's going through a lot," she said, tears swelling in her eyes. "Amy's pregnancy has been very stressful, and your father and we've been paying for everything." She didn't stop there. She explained that Jake still hadn't found work, and Amy's medical bills were piling up. My father had dipped into his retirement account. They were exhausted financially. Then came the real reason she was there. "We need you to step in, son." I stood there frozen. "You want me, the man whose wife was stolen, whose family turned their back on him, to support them?" "Yes," she said, like it was the most natural request in the world. "You've always been the strong one." That was the moment it hit me. They never saw my pain. They only ever saw my utility. To them, I was a resource, an ATM with a pulse, the afterthought turned emergency fund. I told her no, calmly, firmly, without anger, just no. Her face twisted. "How can you be so heartless? He's your brother. That's your niece or nephew." "No," I said, my voice shaking. "That's his child. That's her consequence, not mine." I turned and walked away as she shouted after me. Everyone in the lobby stared, but I didn't care. I'd been humiliated enough by these people. I wasn't doing it again. Later that night, I received an email from Jake, from a new address I hadn't blocked yet. It was exactly what you'd expect. Manipulation, guilt, desperation. He talked about Amy's pregnancy complications, about not being able to afford prenatal vitamins, about wanting to be a better man. He attached a sonogram photo, like that would suddenly erase everything he'd done. I didn't reply. The next day, my dad showed up at my apartment building. He didn't ask to come up, just stood in the lobby and told the front desk he was there to talk to his son who abandoned his family. I had to tell building management to add my entire family to the do not let in list. Even that didn't stop the emails, the calls, the vague posts on Facebook from Amy about men who walk away from their responsibilities. Jake resharing them with hashtags like #family first #. The irony would be laughable if it didn't hurt so much, because no matter how far I pushed them away, they kept clawing their way back, not out of love, but out of need, out of entitlement. They weren't sorry, they were desperate. And I was done. Just when I thought the harassment had peaked, it escalated into something far more unthinkable, something almost absurd if it weren't so cruel. I was sipping coffee at my kitchen table on a quiet Tuesday morning when I got the email from my attorney. Subject line: Notice of Petition for Financial Support. Amy and Jake Smith. I blinked, read it again, then again. They were suing me. Jake and Amy, the couple who destroyed my marriage, tore apart my family, and dragged my name through the mud, were now demanding that I pay them. Their filing claimed that circumstantial changes and unexpected medical needs warranted additional financial support. Amy had marked the pregnancy as high risk. Jake claimed mental anguish from the emotional abuse I inflicted by exposing their affair. They accused me of ruining Jake's professional reputation and said my public silence about the situation was tacit approval of harassment from third parties. In short, they wanted my money because I hadn't rolled over and let them walk all over me. I called my attorney in disbelief. She didn't sound surprised, only angry. This is retaliation, but it's also desperation, and we've been documenting everything, she said. She was right. Every unsolicited visit, every social media post, every email, voicemail, and lobby stunt, she had it all. And so we prepared. Depositions were scheduled, evidence submitted. I took time off work and steeled myself for a courtroom showdown I never asked for. The day of the hearing felt surreal. Amy waddled in, 8 months pregnant, wearing a flowing maternity dress and a forced look of fragility. Jake wore our dad's old suit, clearly borrowed for effect. My parents sat behind them like proud witnesses at a graduation, beaming with smug defiance. Their lawyer spun a story that might have worked if I hadn't lived through every brutal detail. They painted me as cold, emotionally unavailable, vengeful. They argued the stress of my abandonment had negatively impacted Amy's health. Jake's inability to find employment? My fault, supposedly, for blackballing him in the tech community. Then my lawyer stood up. With terrifying calm, she played lobby security footage. My mother's scene, Jake banging on the glass, Amy trying to sneak in through the back. She scrolled through screenshots of their online smear campaign. The emotionally abusive posts? Half of them were memes Jake reshared with captions like, "Some brothers don't know how to take a joke." Then came the medical records. Amy's pregnancy wasn't high risk at all. Standard checkups, healthy development, no complications. Next, we revealed Jake's recent rejections from employers. Not because of me, but because he turned down jobs that were beneath him. Positions he was lucky to get after everything. Finally, we handed the judge a folder showing Amy had declined a full-time teaching offer because she didn't want to return to work yet. They were lying, exploiting a baby they conceived through betrayal to try and wring more money from the person they hurt most. The judge's response? He shut it down. Motion denied. Not only that, he reduced my alimony by 60%. He said, "This court does not look kindly on those who weaponize the legal system for personal revenge." Jake's jaw went slack. Amy burst into tears. My parents looked like they'd swallowed glass. I didn't smile. Not in the courtroom, but inside I felt a shift, a small breath of justice in a storm of betrayal. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. You'd think that after the courtroom loss, they'd finally stop. That maybe, just maybe, they'd feel an ounce of shame and leave me in peace. But that's not how people like Amy and Jake operate. When manipulation fails, they pivot to guilt. And when guilt doesn't work, they send someone else in their place. That someone was my Aunt Linda. I hadn't spoken to her in years, not because of any falling out, but simply because we moved in different circles. She was my father's sister, always pleasant but distant. So when I saw her name pop up on my phone one quiet Friday afternoon, I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "Hi, honey," she said sweetly. "I hope I'm not bothering you." I already knew this wasn't a casual check-in. She eased in slowly, talking about how proud everyone was of me, how far I'd come, how life had been so hard lately, for everyone. And then she got to the real reason for her call. "Your father isn't doing well," she said. "The stress of everything. It's aged him. He's talking about early retirement and your parents are considering selling their home." I stayed quiet, waiting for the pitch I knew was coming. "They're scared. They're drained financially and emotionally. Jake and Amy, well, we both know they made mistakes, but they're family. Your mother cries herself to sleep every night." I almost laughed. Where was all this emotional concern when I was being publicly betrayed? When my life was crumbling under the weight of their silence and complicity? She continued. "They didn't handle it right, but they're still your parents. Jake's still your brother. You can't erase that. Family is all we have in the end." And then she said it. "Maybe you could help them, just enough to get back on their feet." There it was, the ask, wrapped in sugar but still poison. I drew a deep breath. My heart was pounding, but my voice was calm. "Linda, let me ask you something," I said. "You've got 3 rental properties and your husband owns a successful law firm. Why don't you help them?" Dead silence. She stammered. That's different. You're his brother. You have a responsibility." "No," I said firmly, "I don't. That responsibility ended the day Jake slept with my wife and you all stood behind him like he was the victim." "You're going to regret this someday," she warned, "when you're old and alone." "No, Linda, I'll regret every year I spent begging people who didn't love me to act like they did. I'm not doing that anymore." I hung up. Then I blocked her number. That call should have made me angry. It should have left me bitter. But it didn't. It gave me clarity. That night, I sat alone in my condo, lights dimmed, listening to the low hum of the city outside. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like the villain in someone else's narrative. I wasn't the abandoned husband, the forgotten son, the scapegoat. I was just a man finally learning what it meant to say no. No to manipulation, no to shame, no to guilt dressed up as family values. They wanted me to carry the weight of their decisions, and for the first time in my life, I dropped it, and I didn't pick it back up. The morning after my call with Aunt Linda, I stood in the middle of my living room, surrounded by half-packed boxes and the quiet hum of possibility. Seattle. The word had been echoing in my mind ever since I accepted the new job offer. A promotion, a new team, a fresh start across the country. But it wasn't just about career growth. It was about reclaiming space for myself. A space where my name wasn't always followed by Jake's brother, or my presence wasn't a reminder of betrayal. I started taping up boxes, packing up the life I'd built in Boston. Photos, books, even the little bonsai tree Amy once gave me. For a second, I hesitated over it. But then I placed it in the box too. Some ghosts don't need to follow you to your next chapter. Later that evening, my team at work threw me a small farewell party. It wasn't extravagant, just pizza, laughter, and a few heartfelt speeches. But it was the kind of genuine appreciation I had craved my entire life. No backhanded compliments, no being overshadowed. Just people who valued me for who I was and what I brought into their lives. One of my colleagues, Sarah, handed me a card signed by the whole department. Inside was a single line that hit harder than I expected. "Your worth isn't determined by people who refuse to see it." I choked back tears, because that sentence, that simple truth, was what I had needed to hear since I was a boy standing on a graduation stage, staring out at empty seats where my parents should have been. Packing continued into the weekend. The condo, once full of warmth and shared memories, had become just walls and furniture. My life had already moved on. The space was just catching up. And then came the final task, clearing the balcony. Amy's old container garden was still there, dry, neglected, forgotten. I stood there for a long time, just looking out over the city that had held both the best and worst of me. I gently pulled up the last withered plant, tossed the soil, and wiped my hands clean. Symbolic? Maybe, but necessary. That night, I wrote one last email, not to Jake, not to Amy, not to my parents, to myself, a reminder. You did everything you could. You gave love, you gave patience, You gave second chances. And when it came time to protect yourself, you finally said no. That's not selfish, that's survival. You've earned this next chapter. Now go live it. Monday morning, I handed my keys to the property manager and took one final look around. No tears, no lingering doubts. Just quiet resolve. As I walked to my car, the early spring breeze felt different. Cleaner. Lighter. Like something heavy had finally lifted off my shoulders. I turned the ignition. My phone buzzed. A new message. Blocked number. I didn't open it. Some doors deserve to stay shut. I pulled out of the lot, merged onto Interstate 90 West, and left the city behind. Not in anger, not in pain, but in peace. Seattle greeted me with gray skies and fresh rain. Not exactly the postcard welcome, but it fit. This city had seen storms, just like me. It felt honest. The first few weeks at the new job flew by in a blur of onboarding meetings, lunch invites, and long walks through the evergreen-lined trails near my apartment. My coworkers were curious but respectful. No one knew my story. No one compared me to Jake. I was just me. And that anonymity, that quiet space to rebuild, was exactly what I needed. One Saturday afternoon, I decided to finally unpack the last box labeled personal. It had sat in the corner of my bedroom like a sleeping dog I wasn't quite ready to wake. Inside were remnants of my old life. Photos from college, my MIT diploma, a card Amy had once given me on our first anniversary that read, "Us against the world." That card went straight into the trash, but beneath it, folded neatly, was a letter I had almost forgotten about. A birthday card from my father, dated 4 years ago. I hadn't even opened it when it arrived. I had been too busy, too buried in work, too numb to believe it was anything meaningful, but something made me open it now. Inside was a short note, written in his tight, old-fashioned cursive. "Happy 30th, son. We're proud of how far you've come. I don't always say it, but I hope you know that. Keep going." Dad. It hit harder than I expected. Why hadn't he ever said it out loud? Why had that kind of sentiment been so rare, so buried, so late? Was this guilt? Regret? A moment of clarity? I'd never know. That letter wasn't an apology, but it was something. A flicker. And even though it came years too late, I let myself feel it. I didn't forgive him. Not fully, but I acknowledged the gesture, and sometimes that's the only closure you get. Later that evening, I lit a small fire in the outdoor pit behind my building. I brought out some of the old photos, the ones that hurt too much to keep, and fed them to the flames. Watching Jake's smug grin curl and blacken, Amy's handwritten love notes turn to ash, it felt like a final act of reclamation. I wasn't erasing history. I was choosing what deserved to stay in my future. A knock at my patio gate startled me. It was one of my new neighbors, a kind older woman named Teresa. She smiled, holding a plate of warm chocolate chip cookies. "Just wanted to welcome you again," she said. "You look like you could use something sweet." And for the first time in a long time, I didn't say, "I'm fine." I just smiled back and said, "Thank you, I really could." We sat by the fire for a while, eating cookies and talking about nothing important. But it was everything I needed, because sometimes healing doesn't come in grand moments or epic closure. Sometimes it comes in the form of a neighbor's kindness, a warm cookie, and the quiet realization that the worst is finally behind you. I looked out over the flickering flames and whispered to myself, "You made it. You really made it." I just started to feel like I was living again. Mornings in Seattle were brisk and calm. I'd grab coffee at the corner shop, walk the 3 blocks to my office, and feel the weight on my chest start to loosen. I was settling into something that resembled peace. Then, out of nowhere, my building's front desk called me. "There's a woman here. Says she's your cousin, Laura. She insists it's urgent." Laura. The last time I saw her, she was 14, sitting on the floor of my parents' living room, flipping through Jake's old baseball cards while I boxed up my things before leaving for MIT. I hadn't spoken to her since. Curiosity mixed with anxiety as I made my way to the lobby. She stood by the windows, older of course, but unmistakable. She looked at me with a kind of guilt already stamped across her face. "Hey," she said, "I know this is a lot, but I needed to tell you something. In person." I gestured toward a nearby bench. All right, go ahead. She swallowed hard. Jake and Amy are talking about moving here, to Seattle. It felt like the air got punched out of me. My first instinct was denial. No way, they wouldn't dare. But then again, entitlement had always been their specialty. They're broke, she continued, totally drowning. Jake thinks a change of scenery will help. He said you're here and doing well, that maybe you'd come around. I blinked. Come around? Laura looked pained. He's telling people you're warming up and might help them get on their feet. He's spreading this story that you're rebuilding the family, that you've found forgiveness. My jaw clenched. Forgiveness? I hadn't spoken a word to him in over a year. I had buried that chapter with the ashes in my fire pit. I didn't want to believe it, she said softly. But I felt like you needed to know. Thank you for telling me, I replied, voice low, measured. But if they show up here, they won't find what they're looking for. That night, I sat on my balcony with a glass of bourbon, letting the chill night air numb the anger rising in my chest. How many times could one person be used? How many second chances did they think they were owed? But instead of spiraling, I did something different. I pulled out my laptop and began writing a letter, not to Jake, not to Amy, not even to my parents, to myself. I poured out everything I'd been carrying, the ache of being overlooked, the sting of betrayal, the fatigue of always being the bigger person. And then I wrote the line that had been living inside me since that courtroom day. I am not a bridge for people who burned me to walk across again. I saved the letter, didn't send it, didn't need to. Because that was the closure I gave myself. Seattle was my new beginning, and if they came looking for a handout or a second chance, they would find locked doors and silence. They chose who they were, and now I finally chose me. 3 weeks passed after Laura's visit, and I hadn't heard anything. No calls, no emails, no messages from building security. Part of me hoped they had finally given up, but deep down, I knew better. The past doesn't let go that easily. It happened on a Saturday morning. I had just finished grocery shopping, walking back to my apartment with a bag of oranges and a loaf of fresh sourdough when I saw them. Jake and Amy, standing across the street like a scene from a movie I never wanted to be in. Amy looked tired. She held a baby in her arms. Jake looked thinner than I remembered, almost gaunt, like the weight of his bad choices was finally settling on his shoulders. I stopped. They didn't speak right away. Jake raised his hand, hesitating. Can we talk? No, I said almost gently. You shouldn't be here. Amy took a step forward. Please, just 5 minutes. You don't have to say anything. We just want... You want something, I cut in. That's always been the case. The baby whimpered. Amy rocked it, eyes welling. This is your niece. I looked at the child. Round cheeks, a knit hat pulled low over tiny ears. I didn't feel anger in that moment. Just a profound, bone-deep sorrow. I'm sure she's beautiful, I said quietly, and I hope she grows up in a world where people take responsibility for their actions. Jake's face twisted. We didn't come here to fight. We're in a bad place, man. I know, but that place was built by your own hands. Amy opened her mouth, but I raised my hand. I don't hate you, I said, but I don't owe you. You made choices, I made mine, and my choice now is to walk away for good this time. Jake stepped forward, desperate. You're really going to let us struggle like this? Family doesn't turn its back. You turned your back on me the moment you started sneaking behind mine, I replied. He didn't answer. There wasn't much left to say. I crossed the street, not looking back, not even when I heard Amy whisper, I'm sorry. Maybe she was. Maybe Jake was too. But apologies don't rewrite history. They don't undo betrayal. And they sure as hell don't rebuild trust. That night, I sat on my balcony again, the city humming below, the cool wind brushing past me like a soft reminder that life, despite everything, still moves forward. I opened my journal, something my therapist encouraged, and wrote 3 simple lines. I loved, I lost, I learned. It was the truth. My journey wasn't about revenge. It was never about getting even. It was about reclaiming my peace. I blocked their numbers again, told the front desk to extend the no contact order indefinitely, and when I closed my laptop that night, I knew something for sure. I was free, not from Jake, not from Amy, not even from my parents. Free from the idea that I had to keep bleeding to prove I was the better person. I didn't need to be the bigger man anymore. I just needed to be myself. And for the first time in my life, I was.